Fantastic to be with you today, and I have Maryam with me, who is the Vice President for Students and Associates on Council with the RIBA. Maryam, would you just like to give me a little bit background about your job and your role at the RIBA?
Sure. Hi, Jason. Lovely to be here with you. So I'm currently the vice president, but I'm basically a student elected representative. I was elected in around 2019, and I just the way that I kind of ran was I just checked my emails and I noticed that the RIBA was undertaking applications for student representatives. And I remember not really being sure, what is it and what exactly is the role, but then my mentor at the time, Adrian, friend, really encouraged me, and Maria, the head of school at UConn. I'm from a really small architecture school, and they were so supportive. So I sent in an application, and I told all my friends, when the voting started to, please vote for me. And I never really thought that I would actually win. I just kind of ran because I thought, if I don't run, then who will? And I was a little bit sick of waiting for change. But my role really now, after I got the job, was it's basically like a volunteer position where you sit on there's different committees on the RIBA. So the RIBA has the main committee, which is National Council. This is where all elected representatives sit on council, or now it's virtual. And then also there's different committees like Education Committee, which I sit on, and there's Architecture for Change, which is about diversity. I sit on that as well. My other colleagues who are also representatives, Victoria and Lewis, they sit on, there's membership, and there's a lot of other different committees on that the RIBA does. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, and just as well, because I'm near Manchester, you studied at Manchester as well as...
Yeah, I'm still studying actually at Manchester. I'm still a student at the moment. I'm doing my part 2.
Oh, wonderful. I think this would probably worth me sharing with people why I asked to speak to you, because I saw you at an event, I think it was last year, called Glam Girls Global, with one of my good friends, Neil Pinder, and I saw I'd heard what you said about this thing that I think is really affecting students of architecture, digital poverty. And do you think digital poverty has been present always, kind of maybe for the last 10 years, but do you think coronavirus has just accelerated this gap?
Unfortunately, yes. I think with a degree like architecture, which has always had an expensive background, however, you wouldn't think it would be like that today. But the reality is COVID has exacerbated the differences, especially as so many students were relying on part-time work, and with everything going on digitally, that means you can no longer use the university infrastructure, at least when universities closed down in the beginning. And, that means using university computers or workshops, and then, being stuck in that small room as a student and sitting there. It's not really ideal to be even sitting there 24/7, nonetheless, like you can't go out. So I think that it has somehow shown the problems more clearly if they weren't that clear before.
Maybe it's worthwhile you just explaining what you understand as digital poverty, just for anyone who doesn't kind of know, especially in relation to students, because studio culture within architecture is, it's really big, and moving, like you said, that transition from being, you might be in quite a small space, so maybe just understand, for the viewers, what you understand it to be.
I think the way the architecture program is taught today is strongly suggestive to using computer for digital 3-dimensional modeling, or even 2D, anything from like Revit, Rhino, AutoCAD, SketchUp. So that's become the standard, being fully, even fully digital portfolios. So, portfolios are no longer just kind of printed or stuck together. You have to be laid out in InDesign, The visuals you make have to be rendered in rendering engines, and then they have to be, post-production in Photoshop. So I think even diagrams to a certain degree nowadays, the style, it's not good enough to just be hand sketched anymore. It is possible, but it's let's say for something like environmental analysis, you're going to have to make a model to kind of understand the model of like the architecture design you've created. And the thing is, if you don't have these tools, like a computer that can handle the specs, because it's not any computer we're talking about. It has to be a decent graphics card, and the better the graphics card, the higher the price. We're talking more than $1,000 at least for a laptop, and that would support all these different softwares I just mentioned. And this is not taking into account the subscriptions or software costs. Not all softwares are free, and some are needed and they are expensive. This is a lot of cost to students to undergo, and unfortunately, if you're already experiencing hardship, or the first in your family to go to university, or you're under mental health strain, especially a course like architecture, then that leaves these potentially golden gems of like students being at an unfair disadvantage. And if you need a computer to do your work, it's non-negotiable now. It's quite frustrating that it has taken something like COVID for some people to realize that architecture is no longer the kind of rotring pen and drawing board that only happens now in first year. Also, there is internet connection. So I think now with COVID and you have to do Zoom lessons and whatnot, even internet connection, if somebody is kind of not surrounded by the infrastructure to support a good quality network, that's not even their fault. That's out of their control. There are some students who have to go live back home, and it's just the internet is not there at the moment. The infrastructure, the groundwork, so the connection is a little bit poor, and that makes it very frustrating when joining and being kind of forced to do Zoom classes.
No, I just wonder as well on that one. Do students reach out to the likes of you to I just wondered what stories you could share. I can understand that. You might have that Wi-Fi ability, but the bandwidth might not be sufficient enough to run even to run a Zoom call. So I just wondered if you could maybe share some stories that you've heard from people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've heard quite a bit. I mean, I think the most sad, even as being a student, I think the most saddest stories are the ones where their old computer, crashes and they lose all their work, and then that student is forced to undertake kind of an extenuating circumstance or something. I've heard stories where some students really trying their best, no matter what the circumstances is, working on the floor and I think that's really what I admire is that despite the hardship, they're still trying. And many students, there are students also applying for the hardship fund. And I was actually one of the judging panels on the hardship fund as well as on the RIBA bursary. And some of the stories are about, the worst ones are basically some students choosing between eating or buying model making materials. And this is probably the worst thing I have heard, because no student should choose between going hungry or studying. That doesn't really make sense to me. So I think it's these kind of stories that are quite frustrating during COVID, where students are already being asked to pay, you have to pay $9,000 to study. And then you're paying for a Zoom lecture. It's no longer, that studio environment that you're missing out on, and you're paying rent. And I think a lot of students feel quite frustrated that even the social aspect of university is missing. And it's become very difficult to get in the mood to study, nonetheless try their best. And if in areas where, your internet is not stable and something's out of your control, I think these kind of things really have an impact on your ability to do well at university.
Oh, wow, I hadn't even thought about people choosing whether to eat or not, or buy the materials for a model. That's just nice. So would you say that digital poverty is increasing the mental health issues with students of architecture?
I think it is. I mean, the statistics certainly do agree with this. The RIBA did a survey in summer in 2020, and it just kind of asked. The first question was like, "Are equipments not adequate for the work that you need to do?" And 25% of students said yes, they're not adequate. Are you finding it difficult to pay for the equipment that you need to do your work? And I think it was 19% said it is kind of an issue. And then you have like equipment is not adequate for the work I need to do, and a quarter of students said that it's not adequate. And so I think they also asked about mental health. They said 58% of respondents told us that their mental health had deteriorated because of COVID-19 crisis, and 39% said their physical health had deteriorated, and 45% were feeling isolated, and 39% were not keeping in touch with their peer groups. And that was kind of in the middle of the pandemic, around August. So I think, touch on a year later, it's probably increased, I think. I think architecture is a stressful course already, and with a lot of work and compromise. And having another problem like the tools you depend on to use is just going to make things a lot worse and harder. So it's like asking a caveman, yeah, have to go hunting without a spear, It's a bit of a disadvantage, I think, if you're trying to work and you're relying on other external sources to kind of for your work as well. So I think it would cause a lot of strain if it's not working well, or nonetheless, if the computer is not at the specification that you need it to run the software. So I think it is a bit of a dilemma now with COVID.
No, it'd be interesting if they actually, like you were suggesting, I think, just rerun that survey, a year. So you've got that full year since I think we're coming up to that year now, aren't we? When we went into lockdown, to see if them figures have increased or they've decreased. That would be very interesting. I mean, so what do you think are the solutions as we move forward? And we're coming out of lockdown, and hopefully we don't return. What do you think of the solutions?
I understand, of course, with COVID, it was about safety, of course, being the first priority to enabling learning. And of course, that is something that has to be there. And the thing is, we don't want any kind of suffering in silence of students to kind of choose. I think we need a greater understanding that, unfortunately, there's still this kind of olden age and view that architecture, that this isn't even a problem, that digital poverty isn't a problem. And I think greater awareness is a start. You know, Also some kind of working compromises between maybe perhaps industry and educational institutes at finding a fair price. And I truly mean fair. That's actually, beneficial for students. They're not having to compromise what they eat, or, we don't want to kind of have extreme options here. Or even like a pricing model that would help support them in a longer term. We need a loaning system of that the same way you can borrow a library book, maybe you can borrow a laptop, and it should be part of your 9 grand that you're paying already for university, or at least we can see some universities lobbying for companies, or even the government sponsoring a kind of digital upgrade for all students. I think this is a skill set that we're going to need, and already with COVID, we've seen that it's not going to go away. If most, we just have to make sure we're even more adaptive and more adaptable to change. So I think starting, like as a start, to having the right tools would be a really good start, and would allow students the opportunities to create different things while exploring it through digital. It certainly seems to be the way forward.
You've got to have some sort of level playing field, don't you? Really, I think in an ideal situation, I think ideally we'd all like to have the same spec laptops, the same software, and the same bandwidth. So you're just judging a student of architecture on their ability and their creativity. But unfortunately, we're not at that point. This is the thing with digital poverty. If you've got a really good high-end computer, you've got the great software and that great bandwidth, you really a high disadvantage, a high advantage amongst someone who has not got all of them things. So, it's, yeah. So thank you. I've got just one final question. I just want to really know how you are enjoying your role as VP for students and associates at the RIBA.
I think it's a lot of work, but it's work worth doing. I think being able to give back, whether anyone knows or not, is I feel I'm very fortunate to have to be able to have this opportunity to be doing this kind of work and actually trying to make a difference. Even though sometimes you hit a wall with problems or noticing that these things are actually bigger problems than you anticipated. But I think if I wasn't trying, then I wouldn't really be myself really. And I really do enjoy the civic aspect of the role. And myself, Victoria, and Lewis, which are the other student representatives, we work together often to try and make a change. And we have a paper coming up in March, so we'll see how that goes. That has been quite a long, hard battle, but I think the RBA, like any place, there is opportunity for change, and if we aren't advocating it, then who will? So I hope that other people sort of try and engage a little bit more as well.
Well, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for your answers to them questions. And digital poverty. I just wanted to highlight that issue after I saw you speak last year. So thank you so much, and I hope we can keep in touch, and maybe there'll be other topics in the future. So thank you so much.